And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. You stare at darkness behind closed eyelids, and it stirs not random, but a summons. Your nightmares are not malfunctions of sleep, but coded messages refusing to remain hidden, beckoning you into rooms where fear lives unfiltered, where protective walls crumble in mist, where the youngest parts of yourself still tremble from what they never dared to say. They are the unconscious speaking in its own terms, in images you cannot control, in emotions you cannot censor, in symbolism that resists the tidy narratives of consciousness. Nightmares are not punishments, they are requests. Invitations from the psyche demanding translation, not erasure. Each creature or collapse, each fall or being chased, is an echo of earlier collapse, of earlier fear, of earlier shame whose roots extend beyond personal history into ancestral grief that still resonates in the marrow of your bones. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. You wake gasping, drenched in dread, and you call it bad dream, and move on. But what if that movement is the problem? What if the only way through is to stay with the tremor in your chest, to map it, to follow it backward, until you stand in the memory that needed healing, the part of you never held, the wound you sanitized, so you could function? And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory, because the unconscious will not let go until you do, and if you do not listen, it will press deeper. It will show you again tonight, more violently perhaps, until the request becomes impossible to ignore, and in that urgency, you might finally choose to go inward. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. And the deeper you go, the more symbols appear not as guides, but as witnesses. The river rising in your dream, the house crumbling, the lover becoming a monster. They are not random. They are your inner weather, reflecting emotional climates you can no longer contain. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. The dam is about to break, and the dam was never your safety. It was your disguise. Without it, you feel exposed, raw. But this exposure is the beginning of integration, the process of collapsing interior walls so the unconscious can enter you, piece by piece, image by image, fear by fear. This is not therapeutic fluff. This is psychic excavation. It is not about feeling better. It is about becoming whole fractured. Yes, but whole, with all the jagged edges you tried to smooth away reclaimed as boundary markers of truth. Every insight is hard-won, not a comforting dawn, but a quiet clearing after a long night. Pain does not vanish. It becomes intelligible. Grief does not recede. It becomes a bell that calls you back to yourself. Anxiety does not disappear. It becomes a pattern you can witness, not be possessed by. This is Freud's sober gift, the recognition that the unconscious shapes reality, and that transformation is not metaphor, it is literal. It is the slow re-patterning of your inner world, so your outer world begins to shift, not because external conditions change, but because you have responded differently from the center. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. He argued that much of what we experience consciously is shaped by conflicts between the id, ego, and superego, with dreams offering disguised fulfillment of repressed wishes. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. You are not walking away from suffering. You are walking into it. And in doing so, you learn its grammar. You begin to discern the entanglements between memory and neurosis, between defense and desire, between repression and collapse. You begin to see that the self you present is an architecture built on omission, and that the only foundation strong enough to hold the real you is truth, even when it feels terrifying. This is a conscious act of unmaking, not of moral failure, but of psychic honesty, not of healing as cure, but healing as witnessing. You witness your own fragmentation until the shards begin to reflect wholeness again. You do not need to be understood by others. You need only to be understood by yourself. The nightmare is not an anomaly, but a structured communication from the unconscious. As Freud observed, dreams are the disguised fulfillments of repressed wishes, desires that the conscious ego has judged unacceptable. In nightmares, such desires often return with heightened intensity, having undergone the dream work of condensation and displacement. What appears as a terrifying monster or collapsing architecture is not arbitrary. It is a symbol, a cipher, expressing in coded form the inner conflict between instinct and inhibition. The unconscious does not warn, it insists. It repeats until heard. And through interpretation, not erasure, we begin the work of transformation. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. Freud viewed the nightmare not as a failure of sleep, but as the psyche's effort to dramatize conflict, using symbolism that compresses multiple ideas into singular, emotionally charged images, a function known as dream work. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. And the moment you pause to listen, something shifts. The terror does not leave, but it gets context. The dream loses its tyranny. The unknown becomes a corridor instead of a trap. This is the power of interpretation, not to control the psyche, but to meet it, partner with it, map its terrain so you can finally navigate the landscape of your own soul. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. This is not the end. It is the beginning of knowing, of living a life not authored by accident or avoidance, but authored by attention to the shadows, to the textures, to the notes of your inner melody that you ignored. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. And so, the descent continues, not downward, but inward, into the echoing caverns of memory, where nothing has ever truly died, only waited. Here, the child you forgot still flinches. Here, the pain you intellectualized still bleeds beneath your cleverness. Here, the love you lost still pulses in phantom form. And here, at last, the ego begins to loosen its grip, not from weakness, but from seeing that it was never meant to carry this weight alone. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. To analyze is not to dismantle, it is to reveal. It is to walk slowly through your ruins and name every stone, to learn the language of your own ruins and finally speak fluently with yourself. You begin to notice what you thought was madness was defense. What you thought was weakness was protection. What you thought was irrational fear was unprocessed memory, still lodged like a thorn in the unconscious flesh of your psyche. When the dream recurs, and it inevitably will, the individual no longer awakens merely in distress but in analysis. Freud noted that the act of inquiry itself disrupts the compulsion to repeat. By asking, what wish or fear does this represent? The dreamer initiates the interpretive process that distinguishes repression from mere forgetting, latent content from manifest narrative, and symbolic distortion from historical memory. The unconscious ceases to be a tormentor and becomes a field of coded meaning, awaiting translation. You see how so much of what you called fate was habit, and how much of your identity was built from what you didn't dare feel. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. You do not blame. You do not accuse. You observe. You hold the unbearable within a frame, wide enough to contain it. You name the shame and realize it never belonged to you. You meet the rage and trace it back to a moment where you were voiceless. You welcome the anxiety, not to indulge it, but to understand its origin, how it flared in moments of helplessness and became the air your nervous system learned to breathe. This is not romantic. It is rigorous. It is not bliss. It is revelation. The unconscious rarely offers comfort, it confronts. Its contents, long repressed by the ego, re-emerge not to please, but to reveal. As Freud argued, the return of the repressed is often marked by anxiety and psychic disturbance. Yet it is precisely in these moments that truth begins to surface. What is painful is not pathological by default. It is often the sign that a forbidden wish, a buried instinct, or an unresolved memory is seeking representation. This pain is not antithetical to peace. It is the threshold through which psychic integration becomes possible. You are not awakening in the way the culture sells you. You are not transcending. You are descending into your full humanity. And from that depth, you do not rise shiny and new. You rise scarred and sovereign, no longer asking to be saved, no longer needing to be fixed, no longer willing to lie to yourself just to stay comfortable. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory, because you have touched the thing beneath the thing, the core conflict, the primal longing, the original wound. You have named it, held it, befriended the dream monster that once devoured your sleep. And now, the dreams begin to change. The symbols soften. The chase is slow. The collapsing walls become open thresholds. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. This is the silent work. This is the unglamorous liberation, the kind that no one sees but you. And in that privacy, something sacred is restored. The contract with your own soul. The ability to walk into the night without needing the light to follow. The faith that what rises in your unconscious is not your enemy, but your unspoken ally. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. So let them come, the dreams, the nightmares, the fragments of yourself you once banished. Let them arrive and speak, because now you are not afraid to hear. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. Now, you are not at war with your unconscious. Now, you are listening. Then stay with me, for what comes next is not another descent, but a gathering, a ritual of return, a reassembly of the fragments you have held, piece by trembling piece, like a priest of your own resurrection. There is no triumph here, only truth, and truth is enough. It does not come in the form of applause, but in the stillness of recognition that you are no longer a stranger to yourself. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. The unconscious has no final chamber. There is no last key, no ultimate revelation, but there is rhythm. And in rhythm, there is meaning. And in meaning, there is peace, not the peace of silence, but the peace of coherence, of finally hearing all parts of your inner choir and knowing you no longer need to silence one voice to make another sing. Now, When fear knocks, you do not slam the door. You open it. You ask it what memory it carries, what danger it once preserved you from, what shape it wore when you were too young to name it. And in doing so, fear transforms, not into courage, but into contact, into presence, into intimacy with what once overwhelmed you. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. This is where psychoanalysis returns to its root. Not the diagnosis, not the symptom, but the relationship between you and your own mind, between you and the unconscious that has been longing not to destroy you, but to be integrated, to be understood. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. And when you sleep tonight, and dream again, and wake with a tremor or a tear you will not rush to forget, you will remember. You will pause, you will write it down, you will sit with it, not as a victim of it, but as a witness, because you know now the nightmare is a map, the dream is a door, the image is an invitation, and the terror is only the threshold. You cross it, not because you are fearless, but because you are ready. You are no longer asking for escape. You are asking for understanding. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. And this is how it ends. Not with the unconscious made fully conscious, that is a myth, but with the unconscious no longer feared, no longer exiled, no longer mistaken for chaos, when it is in fact your coded longing to become whole. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. You walk forward now, not away from your dreams, but with them. Because your nightmares were never there to punish you. They were there to awaken you. And now you are awake. And in that awakening, there is no parade, no grand unveiling, just breath slower, deeper, more rooted. Just the weight of your body finally felt from within, no longer escaped, no longer rejected. You do not rise as a perfected self, but as one no longer ashamed of their complexity. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. The unconscious does not stop speaking. It never will. But its voice is no longer cryptic. Its symbols are no longer threats. Its darkness is no longer a void. It is a womb, a sanctuary, a ground of becoming, where what was broken is not erased, but recontextualized, so that every scar becomes a sentence in your soul's biography, every symptom a stanza in the poem of your survival. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. You realize now that repression was never your failure. It was your first attempt at protection. You forgive it. You thank it. And then, gently, you begin to choose something else. Not because you're finally ready, but because you're finally willing to sit with discomfort without fleeing, to hold contradiction without solving, to meet yourself at midnight, without lights on, without answers. And there, in that brave humility, the inner war begins to dissolve, not in a burst, but in a slow and sacred undoing, like frost melting beneath sunlight, not forced, but inevitable. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. You are no longer afraid to grieve what you didn't know you lost. You are no longer afraid to rage at what was denied to you. You are no longer afraid to feel love for the parts of yourself that others could not hold. You begin to parent the inner orphan, to hear the anxious child, to kiss the terrified shadow, to trust the strange brilliance of your own instincts. And in doing so, the psyche aligns not into balance, but into truth. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. Your ego does not die, it learns to listen. Your defenses do not vanish, they lower their weapons. Your pain does not disappear, it becomes part of your language, a fluency in vulnerability, a grammar of depth. And what now? Now, you live. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. You live not to avoid discomfort, but to meet it with presence. You live not to perform coherence, but to embody it messy, authentic, whole. You live not to transcend your humanity, but to inhabit it so fully that nothing in you is left unloved. You are not a project. You are a psyche rich, wild, terrifyingly alive. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. And your dreams are no longer exiles. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. They are guides. And your nightmares, they are no longer omens. They are initiations. This is not a lesson. This is your myth, rewritten in the language of courage. And this is how we return, not to who we were, but to who we were always becoming. In the dark, in the silence. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory, in the symbol, in the self. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. There is nowhere left to run, and for the first time, that does not terrify you. It liberates you, because the escape routes were never exits. They were circles. And now that you've stopped running, you can finally walk forward, not into the future, but into the present, which you'd been trained to abandon in favor of performance, avoidance, perfection. You start to breathe in rhythm with your own truth, not someone else's expectations. You no longer flinch at the mirror, you meet it. You no longer drown in silence, you hear the song beneath it. You no longer look for saviors because you've seen what happens when you wait too long for someone else to rescue what only you were meant to hold. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. You are no longer seduced by chaos, no longer addicted to numbness, no longer mistaking control for power. Real power is this: to feel without fleeing, to remember without collapsing, to speak without needing agreement, to dream without censorship. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. And when you close your eyes now, you are not afraid of what you will see. You are curious, because you know every dream is a proposal, every image a message from the depths. The monsters don't bite anymore. You've named them. You've made space for them. And in return, they've become allies, not polished, not pretty, but honest. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. This is the life that waits beyond repression, not comfort, but clarity, not relief, but reality. A life where nothing inside you has to hide. A life where integration is the only revolution. So when someone asks you, what changed? You won't give them an answer. You'll give them a look. The kind of look only someone who has gone under can give. The kind of gaze that holds night and dawn at once. The kind of silence that doesn't tremble anymore. Because you are not just surviving. You are not just healing. You are remembering who you were before forgetting became your survival strategy. You are becoming not the person they told you to be, but the self that waited through every breakdown, every regression, every relapse for you to finally come home. You are not whole because you are unbroken. You are whole because you broke and kept going. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. And in the end, this is the great psychoanalytic act, not to fix the mind, but to meet the soul. Not to eliminate suffering, but to understand what it wants from us. Not to win against the unconscious, but to learn its language so that we may finally write the myth of ourselves in our own hand. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. And this awakening is not a blaze of glory, but a slow illumination, a quiet coming into focus. It is not the thunderclap of final answers, but the steady, unflinching willingness to live inside your questions, to walk among your symbols, to inhabit your contradictions without shame. You are no longer a collection of symptoms waiting to be cured. You are a psyche, vast and layered, aching and alive, not a riddle to be solved, but a truth to be lived. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. You find that you can sit with discomfort and not immediately reach to anesthetize it. You can hold grief like a sacred stone, not needing to throw it away or polish it clean. You can let joy rise without fear it will be taken. You can let rage speak without having to destroy anything. Because you are no longer governed by what you suppress, you are guided by what you integrate. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. Now, even in your solitude, you are not alone. The parts you exiled return not as ghosts, but as companions. The images from your dreams do not haunt you, they accompany you. Each shadow, each wound, each disowned instinct once named becomes a thread in your tapestry. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is meaningless. Everything is part of your becoming. You stop striving to be good. You aim instead to be whole. You stop chasing purity. You seek authenticity. You stop demanding certainty. You embrace depth. And in that shift, you start to belong not to the world's expectations, but to yourself. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. This is not transcendence. This is incarnation. This is what it means to descend fully into your body, into your story, into the great underground cathedral of the unconscious, not to escape life, but to enter it with all parts of you intact. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. And when the next dream comes, and it will, you will meet it with reverence. You will bow to the strange and the symbolic, the terrifying and the tender. You will decode it not with logic, but with empathy. You will not fear the monsters. You will ask them what they protect. You will not recoil from the blood. You will ask what was sacrificed. You will not erase the image. You will walk into it and find yourself waiting on the other side. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. This is the final turning. You do not wish to be someone else anymore. You only wish to be more deeply yourself. Not the version that pleases, the version that pulses. Not the one that conforms, the one that creates. Not the one that escapes pain, the one that transforms it. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. And so you live, now, not above your unconscious, but with it, hand in hand, soul in symbol, awake in dream, alive in truth. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. And in that dialogue, something ancient stirs a rhythm older than language. deeper than thought. You begin to realize that the unconscious was never an adversary. It was a witness, a guardian, a keeper of what the waking self could not yet bear. It is not darkness in opposition to light. It is the soil in which your light must root if it is to last. Without it, there is no depth, no mystery, no soul. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. You no longer ask, "Why am I like this?" You ask instead, "What does this reveal?" You do not beg your psyche to be more manageable. You become more curious, more reverent, more precise in the way you listen not for answers but for symbols, slips, hesitations, each one a note in the music of meaning. And in that new way of hearing, you discover something miraculous, that every neurosis was an attempt at coherence, every compulsion a cry for contact, every symptom a sacred cipher that points to the exact place you were meant to return and reclaim. This is the psychoanalytic revolution, not to patch over suffering, but to place it in context, not to silence the inner world, but to reawaken it with new eyes. The truth is not always healing, but it is always human. And in its full embrace, the soul finds rest. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. You no longer hide from the past. You study it, not as a prisoner, but as a pilgrim. You no longer perform the self you think is acceptable. You embody the one that is true. You no longer fear being misunderstood because you no longer misunderstand yourself. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. And when others speak from their defenses, you do not retaliate. You recognize the dialect. You speak shadow. You know the script. And you offer space, not because you are superior, but because you've been there. You've been lost inside your own psyche, and you found a way through. That way was not a staircase up, it was a tunnel in, a spiral, descending past memory and myth, through resistance and regression, until you touch something wordless, your origin, not your biography, your essence, not your trauma, your becoming. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. And now you live differently, not perfectly, not painlessly, but poetically. Your life becomes a canvas for the unconscious to speak, not to confuse you, but to deepen you. You see symbols in every ordinary moment. You hear archetypes in conversations. You sense the ancient in the now, because you are finally home, not in a place, but in a way of seeing. The work is never finished. The psyche is a living system. It does not want to be solved. It wants to be heard, held, honored. And you are now its steward, its translator, its keeper of myth. You walk this world as one who is seen beneath the floorboards of consciousness, and you return not with a doctrine but with a devotion to truth, to tenderness, to the terrifying beauty of what lies within. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. And so, you walk not away from your unconscious, but into a lifelong relationship with it. You do not tame it. You do not conquer it. You court it. You care for it. You become fluent in its contradictions, its cryptic metaphors, its hidden longings. You accept that you are not a single self, but a constellation, a dynamic multiplicity shaped by dreams, wounds, desires, and silences too profound for language. You become less obsessed with clarity, more enchanted by complexity. You understand that freedom is not found in the eradication of instinct, but in the integration of it. That wholeness is not about light alone, but the light that knows how to hold its shadow. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. You begin to trust your own timing, to no longer rush your healing, to no longer force insight before it is ripe. You allow the unconscious to unfold in its rhythm, not yours. You understand now transformation is not a straight line, it is a spiral. And you may pass through the same pain again and again, but each time, you are different. Each time, you bring more of yourself to meet it. And this is how you become fully human, not by becoming flawless, but by becoming real. Real enough to feel everything. Real enough to make meaning out of it. Real enough to stop pretending. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. You stop chasing happiness. You pursue aliveness. You stop striving to be right. You strive to be whole. You stop hiding your grief behind accomplishments. You allow it to speak, to move, to bless you with its gravity. And even as the world continues its noise, its surface games and shallow definitions, you know something they do not. That beneath it all, in the depths no one sees, there is a life more intimate, more truthful, more sacred. It is yours. It has always been waiting. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. And when your final days approach, you will not look back and wonder if you lived the right way. You will know. You will feel it in the fullness of what you held, in the stories you dared to rewrite, in the symbols you chose to follow instead of fear. You will leave behind not a perfect legacy, but an honest one. A lineage of courage, of depth, of refusal to live on the surface. You will become an ancestor of truth for yourself, for others, for all who dare to descend. And now there is no curtain call, no applause, no final revelation that wraps it all in certainty. Only this: you are still here, but you are not who you were when you began. You are more haunted, perhaps, but also more honest. You are more tender, but less naive. You have stared into the cracked mirror of your inner world and chosen not to look away. That, alone, is revolution. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. This is not healing, as the world sells it fast, flawless, forever. This is the slow burn of becoming someone who can sit with the unbearable and not flinch, who can listen to what the nightmares say, who no longer sees the unconscious as a prison, but as a terrain wild, mythic, holy. And through that terrain you have walked, barefoot and bleeding, not to escape your pain, but to reclaim it, to name it, to cradle it, until it told you the truth beneath the terror. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. Now, when desire comes to you in dreams, you do not silence it, you decode it. When anxiety tightens its grip, you do not wage war. You ask, what are you guarding? When rage erupts, you do not shame it. You ask what boundary was broken. You have become at last the analyst of your own soul, not the judge, not the savior, but the witness. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory. And this witnessing is the work, not to control the unconscious, but to commune with it, not to banish what feels irrational, but to uncover what feels real. You no longer seek to be untouched by pain. You seek to be transformed by it. You no longer long to forget. You long to remember everything that made you, everything you buried to survive, everything now rising again to be felt, integrated, lived. So this is how it ends. Not in perfection, but in presence. Not in arrival, but in deep, resounding return. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory, to the body, to the dream, to the shadow, to the truth, to yourself, the one who was waiting, not in the light, but in the dark, the one who was never gone. And now, let us consider this through the lens of psychoanalytic theory, only hidden, now seen, now whole, now home.